We've been talking today about the challenges that we face in ensuring that the rule of law applies online as well as offline. We've been talking about the challenges that some of the great specialists here at the AFP face when they seek to get over the barriers that encryption places in the way of them, finding out what terrorists are plotting, what drug traffickers are up to, what people who are exploiting children online are planning. We need to ensure that the internet is not used as a dark place for bad people to hide their criminal activities from the law. And the Australian Federal Police must have the powers, as do all our other intelligence and law enforcement agencies, to enforce the law online as well as offline. Now, in Hamburg at the G20, this issue was brought to the forefront by Australia with the world's 20 leading economies, and you saw a unanimous statement from the G20 reiterating that we expect the rule of law to apply online as well as offline. Now, one of the big challenges we face is that of encryption. Increasingly, communications across the internet, whether it's messaging applications or voice applications, are encrypted end-to-end. And that means that while they can be intercepted, they can't be read. They can't be interpreted other than with considerable difficulty. So what we're seeking to do, working with the other leading economies in the world, is to ensure that the brilliant tech companies in Silicon Valley and their emulators bring their brilliance to bear to assist the rule of law, to enable us to be able, not through backdoors or any sort of untoward means, but legitimately, appropriately, with the force of law, in the usual way that applies in the offline world, enable our law enforcement agencies to have access to these communications so that they can keep us safe. And as the Attorney General will describe in a moment, we are already leading the way here in Australia with new legislative priorities that will ensure that internet companies, like the telcos at the moment, will have the obligation to assist the police with getting access to communications and information and data that they are lawfully entitled to in accordance with an appropriate warrant or court order, and also to give the Australian Federal Police the ability that ASIO currently has to remotely, again, with the force of in accordance with a lawful order, to remotely monitor computer networks and devices. These are vitally important reforms to keep Australians safe. So whether it is in Hamburg at the G20 or at the meeting of the Five Eyes, the closest intelligence cooperation among the 5 leading countries, Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, New Zealand and Canada, in that context where the Attorney General has been, whether it is there or at the G20 or here at home, we are doing everything we can every day to keep Australians safe. Look, I'm not suggesting this is not without some difficulty. As I've said, you would have heard me say when I was in Europe, that there is a culture, particularly in the United States, a very libertarian culture which is quite anti-government in the tech sector. Now, the reality is, however, that these encrypted messaging applications and voice applications are being used obviously by all of us, but they're also being used by people who seek to do us harm. They're being used by terrorists, they're being used by drug traffickers, they're being used by pedophile rings. Now, what the G20 agreed at our initiative, at Australia's initiative, is that we need to say as with one voice to Silicon Valley and its emulators, all right, you've devised these great platforms, now you've got to help us to ensure that the rule of law prevails and that they are not exploited by those who want to hide from the law as they plan to do us harm. Do you want me to tell you what a backdoor is? Yeah, well, a backdoor is typically a flaw in a software program that perhaps the the developer of the software program is not aware of, and that somebody who knows about it can exploit. And this is, if there are flaws in software programs, obviously, and that's why you get updates on your phone and your computer all the time. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about lawful access. And if you look at the communique from the G20, it's talking about lawful authorised access, which is done in accordance with the law. I'm not suggesting this is a problem susceptible to one quick fix, but it is a very big issue, and you have to tackle it, and you have to show leadership. Now, I've shown leadership on Australia's behalf at the G20. George has shown leadership among the Five Eyes on Australia's behalf. What we have to do is work together as a global community to ensure that the rule of law prevails online as well as offline. Again, this is a major challenge to our law enforcement ability, our law enforcement agencies' ability to keep our citizens safe. And what we are doing is everything we can within the parameters of our domestic Australian legal ability and internationally, working with other nations, to ensure that we leave no stone unturned in our efforts to keep Australians safe. That's my job. That's the Attorney-General's job. That's the Commissioner's job, to keep Australians safe. And we will do everything we can, online as we do offline, to keep Australians safe from those who seek to do us harm, whether they are terrorists or drug traffickers or paedophile rings or criminals of any kind. We are a society governed by the rule of law, and it must prevail. The rule of law must prevail online as it does offline. The reality is we need to ensure that we have, of course, the cooperation of technology companies, but we also need to recognise that we live in a society governed by the rule of law, and the law applies to technology companies as it does to everybody else. And so this is a question of whether you want the rule of law to prevail or whether you want the internet to be used as a place. Because of encryption technologies, criminals can hide from justice, criminals can hide from those whose job it is, like the men and women of the AFP we've seen today, whose job it is to keep us safe. So thank you all very much.